Good evening once again. My name is Rabbi Yitzchok Tiechtel with Chabad of Nashville, and welcome to another edition of Parsha Perspectives. Parsha Perspectives is a lesson and an insight into the weekly Torah portion and the Jewish calendar, based on the teachings of Chassidus and Jewish mysticism. Each weekly message is related to our own personal journey to live a life that is filled with meaning and purpose. Friends, we're in the midst of the 9 days, a period of time that we mourn the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, the Holy Temple, which culminates on the fast day of Tisha B'Av, which will be this Thursday. It is the day the two holy temples were destroyed and burnt. The first one by the Babylonians approximately 2,500 years ago, and the second one by the Romans about 1,900 years ago. To commemorate these sad epochs of Jewish history, we observe various customs of mourning during this period of time. For example, we don't listen to live music, we don't drink wine, we don't eat meat, as these things bring us to great joy. And this is the time for mourning. A friend once called me with a halachic question. He said for his 25th anniversary, he surprised his wife with tickets to the symphony. She was very excited about it, and they cleared their busy schedules. And then it occurred to them that going to the symphony in these 9 days might not be the most appropriate thing to do, as it's 9 days of mourning. And I said to them, listen, Jewish law would say that this is not the time of the year to go and do this. And the truth is, he wasn't very happy to hear this. And he tells me, Rabbi, no offense, but enough is enough. I mean, how does it help that we are still crying over a building or buildings that were destroyed over 2,000 years ago? I mean, when God decides to make the temple come down from heaven, the third temple with Mashiach, he knows how to do it on his own. Like, what's the point of all of this? The truth is, I really appreciate his question. Because to many, this whole idea of mourning in the 9 days, it almost seems like a show, after all. I mean, does anyone still feel the pain of an event that happened so long ago? In a totally different time, a totally different era. I mean, none of us experienced this. So if refraining from eating meat and drinking wine for 9 days, and fasting on Tisha B'Av, and we wear slippers, we don't wear leather shoes, and we sit on a lower chair, we do all this on Tisha B'Av, I mean, it almost seems like we're stuck in the past. I mean, can't we let go and just let God figure out, and let us know, when he's ready to bring Mashiach, let us know, and let's move on. Why do we have to live this mourning? The truth is, mourning is not just about the past. Actually, mourning practices prescribed in the Torah really has a very profound lesson with our approach to life in general and the Jewish mission of life. Let me tell you a story. The story of the Talmud tells us a very moving episode. And it describes that it was one of the darkest periods in Jewish history. Jerusalem was destroyed, conquered by the Romans. All the people were just broken, bereft, impoverished. Many of them were taken slaves to Italy, to Rome. They were starving for basics, for bread and water. There was a group of Jewish people said, let's go plead with the Roman emperor. Great rabbis called Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Yeshua, and Rabbi Akiva. They said, we're going to Rome. Let's try to entreat the captors for some relief for this untenable living situation the Jews found themselves in. They were still 120 mil, it's a distance away from the city, and it says they heard from Rome. They saw this beautiful view, and they hear sounds of joy and happiness, and to their great pain, they saw flickering lights, candles, and basically it was cafes in Rome. Young people were sitting and dancing. Hey, look, we destroyed the Holy Temple. Look at these Jews. They are our slaves. Three of the rabbis with them burst into tears. Rabbi Akiva, he laughed. Said, Rabbi Akiva, why are you laughing? Don't you see this sadness? Rabbi Akiva turns back. He says, why are you crying? They said, can we not cry when we see all of the Gentile idolaters enjoying peace and stability? torturing the Jewish people while our temple has been burned to the ground? And Rabbi Akiva says, that's why I'm laughing. Because if this is what God gives to those who transgress his will, imagine how much more lies in store for those who fulfill his will. And the Talmud goes on and tells us one more story. It says, at the same time, this group of rabbis eventually went back up to Jerusalem. When they reached Mount Scopus, which is outside of Temple Mount, they were able to see the ruins of Jerusalem. And they tore their garments in sadness. And then when they came to Temple Mount, they saw the destroyed temple. They saw a fox emerging from the ruins of where the Holy of Holies were. And they began to cry. Rabbi Akiva laughed. And they said, why are you laughing? And once again he replied, why are you crying? And they said, Rabbi Akiva, don't you see? This is the place where the verse states any stranger who approaches it will die. It was so holy. And now foxes are roaming and walking on it. How could we not cry? And Rabbi Akiva replies, that's why I'm laughing. Just as God's prophecy to Uriah, that Zion shall be plowed as a field, so we will see the prophecy to Zechariah, where it says it'll come a day when boys and girls, old and young, will sit in the streets of Jerusalem. And I see that's going to be fulfilled soon. And his companions, the rabbi said, Akiva nichamtani, which means, Akiva, you have comforted us. Akiva, you have comforted us. They said this twice. Now, friends, it seems a bit puzzling, Rabbi Akiva's response. First, what kind of question is why you are crying? Why did Rabbi Akiva ask that? Didn't he share the same grief that they had? The temple was destroyed. It was obvious why they're crying. He also wore sackcloth on Tisha B'Av. He also mourned the temple's destruction. And secondly, what are we to make of his answer? That's why I'm laughing. If somebody stares destruction of Jerusalem, how could you possibly laugh? Sure, you and I, we all believe and we hope for brighter days in the future. But we also, understand that there's a time for sadness and a time for joy. Think of this. Imagine someone walking into a Shiva house of mourners and laughing at their devastation. And he justifies it by saying, I see a bright future. In addition to going against everything humanly righteous, it goes against God's command to comfort the mourner with him. Laughing at a mourner? That's cruel. It's a transgression of the mitzvah to console the mourner, not to laugh. Moreover, after Rabbi Akiva's explanations, his colleague says, Akiva, nichamtani. Akiva, you have comforted us. Akiva, you have comforted us. Think of it. How does his laughter bring comfort to the mourners? So I once heard a profound explanation of Rabbi Akiva's words to his companions. What Rabbi Akiva was saying, this is why I'm laughing, because you're crying. Precisely because I see that you are still in so much pain and that you refuse to make peace with the status quo. I am certain it's going to be good in the end. Because if the rabbis would have stopped crying, Rabbi Akiva would have started crying. If his colleagues would have dried their tears, Rabbi Akiva would have broken down into uncontrolled tearing. If the great sages would have stopped mourning, Rabbi Akiva would have begun mourning. If the rabbis, God forbid, would have said, life under the Romans, hey, not so bad. Yes, the temple was nice, but we Jews must adapt to the new modern norms. We cannot live with the temple anymore. We must forget. We must move on. We must stop crying. Then Rabbi Akiva would have been devastated. Only when he saw his friends cry did he rejoice in the knowledge that Jews have not forgotten the dream. Rabbi Akiva knew that the strongest tool for breaking the walls of exile is stubbornness, the utter refusal to accept the loss of God's holy house, the holy temple, and the privilege of basking in its light. They say a father never treats his children with cruelty. He may show disappointment. He may admonish. He might even withdraw himself. But even in those moments, what he really wants is for the kids to plead with him, "Daddy, come back." And when the Jewish people stubbornly refuse to accept exile and plead with God to end it, their begging will pierce the heavens. And God forbid, if we stop crying for a moment, the joyous laughter of redemption recedes. But when we never stop crying and pleading for redemption, sooner or later, the laughters of redemption will be heard. And we can explain this with the following analogy. A 3-year-old boy is afraid to sleep in his own room at night. So he goes to his parents' bedroom and he says, "Please let me stay and sleep in your room." And this was going on for days and weeks. And one day the father says, "You know what? We need to put an end to it. We have to say, tonight, young son, I love you, but the door to mom's and daddy's bedroom is going to be locked." That night after midnight, they once again hear a knock on the door. And their little boy is saying, "Daddy, Mommy, I'm scared. I want to come sleep in your room." First they try to ignore it, but soon enough the crying turned into wailing. And the mother, having a soft heart, was about to give in, and the father said, "Absolutely not. This has to end." And the boy cried and he cried, and after a while, he fell silent. And the parents breathed a sigh of relief, said, "We won the battle." Yet in the morning when they opened up their door, they were shocked to see the child still lying on the floor, fast asleep. For he cried himself to sleep right there at the doorstep, at the threshold, closest to his parents. We can imagine that the next night they would not let their child cry outside their door again, seeing how much the child depends on them and cannot rest without them. Awakens the deep bond between the parents and the child. The parents simply have no choice but to feel a compassion for their child. Friends, the same applies to Tisha B'Av, the Day of Mourning. For our mourning for the temple is not some nostalgia. It's not a nation of people who are stuck in the past. Rather, this is the beginning of the future and the path to brighter days. For our mourning gives a loud testimony to the fact that we are not comfortable with this exile. We abhor the status quo and we demand an end to it, and we will not rest until that happens. Like a loving parent, this will awaken God's compassion. We are children crying at our Father's door. We have experienced nighttime for way too long. We will weep, we will wail, and perhaps fall asleep at the threshold, but we will never stop until our Father in heaven brings us back to the promised land and rebuilds the holy temple. And friends, this explains a famous question that has been asked about the Amidah prayer. We say every day 3 times a prayer with many requests to God that He gives us all of our needs. And we want to arouse God's mercy. And each time we ask for something, we give Him a reason why God should give it to us. For example, I'll pick 1 or 2 of these prayers. We say, "God, forgive us." You know why? Because you are a forgiving God. "Behold our affliction." Why? Because you are a mighty Redeemer. We say, "Heal us, God," and we will be healed. Why? You know why, God? Because you are our praise. You are the ultimate healer. So what are we saying? That we turn to God and we say, because you are the one that can provide it, and because it is God's nature to do so, God, make it happen. There's one blessing where we give a very different reason as why should God answer us. We say in the prayer, "Esemach David Avdecha," speedily, God, bring us back. Give us Mashiach. Make it happen. You know why, God? Because we hope for your salvation all day. What this means, basically, because we are hoping that you bring us the third era, third holy temple, Mashiach to come, because we hope, you will do it. But friends, since when does hoping for something make it happen? I mean, seemingly, if something's going to happen, it's going to happen. But how does our expecting it to change? How do us hoping and expecting it change anything? I mean, imagine you go into the bank, you're a real estate investor, you say, "Bank, I need a $50 million loan. And because I really need it, and I'm really hoping And I know, and I'm hoping that you will come through. I know you will give it to me. And the bank says, sorry, we know you need it, but this is a bank. We're not a charity fund. I mean, what then is the meaning of this blessing? We say, God, we bring us Mashiach because we hope for it. And the Rabbi spoke about this, and he explained that it means as follows. We say, God, speedily bring the descendant of King David, your servant, to come back, and Mashiach to be here. And if you'll say that we don't merit it, that we don't deserve it, do it anyway. You know why, God? Because we hope for it every single day. And in the merit of us hoping for it, it's sufficient for you to bring it happen. Bring it to the times of Mashiach. In other words, that the merit by which God must redeem us is the fact that we don't give up, that we still hope for it. The trust that we put into Hashem and the yearning, despite everything that happened during these 1900 years of exile, to see God once more, that itself, that we wanted, arouses mercy and God's desire to bring that time closer. So to paraphrase Rabbi Akiva, the mere fact that we're still crying merits the revelation of the ultimate laughter of redemption. And it's such a powerful idea that many years ago, the Rebbe said each person should share it with a group of 5 or 10 friends, and they should share it with their friends until the whole world hopes and prays that we want Mashiach to come to an era of redemption, only goodness and kindness, no suffering, because we hope for it. We never give up. I want to share with you a story about how the power of prayer and hope can bring about a good ending. And that when we really hope and we really pray, God doesn't turn us away empty-handed. God forbid. There's a story told about a Chabad doctor in Israel. His name is Dr. Nir Tal. He grew up in a secular family, not observant, in a kibbutz. And when he was a child, his mother told him, he would tell her life story. And his mother told him as follows. She goes, I was born before the war in Belgium. A very religious family. And she said, when I turned 12, the war broke out. She saw her father and mother and sisters put on the trains, but she was left alone. Since she had colored eyes and blonde hair, she was able to get away, and she was hidden in the house of Gentile neighbors who hid her. She didn't look like the typical Jewish kid. Her Gentile hosts abused her, humiliated her. They forced her to do hard labor. She was really only a young girl. The only hope that kept her going was one day, maybe a miracle will happen, and I'll see my family. Maybe they jumped off the train. Maybe they'll come one day to take her. And one night she made a deal with God. She says, God, listen, I'm going to start saying the Shema every night before I go to bed. That means I trust in you, God, that you're one God and you're always going to be with me. My parents always taught me to say this every night. And because I say this every night, you will give me back my family. And every night without devotion, after a long, hard day of labor, she put her hands over her eyes and she recited the Shema as a personal prayer to God to protect her. And she said, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And when the war ended, it became clear that her family perished in the gas chambers and only one aunt survived, who retrieved her from the Gentile family. And this girl said, God, I'm not forgiving you. I kept my side of the agreement, you didn't. And she says, I am going to leave my parents' way. And she moved to a little kibbutz in Degania. And she completely lived a secular life. And that is the environment Dr. Nir, her son, was raised in. Years later, Dr. Nir, her son, he went through a personal transformation and he became a religious Jew, God-fearing. And together with his wife, he built a beautiful family. He had 4 daughters and 4 sons. They should live and be well. And each one was named after another relative that passed away in the war, uncles and aunts and sisters of his mother. One evening, they went to visit their grandmother. She was by now an elderly lady living on a kibbutz. Now, the small kitchen table wasn't big enough for everyone. So the grandmother, she went out and she brought a big table from the public dining room in the kibbutz and she put it in the yard. That day was Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Memorial Day, and there was a candle burning inside the house. Tal, by now a grown man, head of a family, he looked at the candle inside and he looked at the large table outside. And suddenly all the stories he heard when he was a child hit him like a ton of bricks. And he said, Ima, Mom, it looks like God gave you back your family after all. look at all these people named after your parents and sisters. She covered her eyes and she burst out into tears and she said, yes, my son. He returned to me what has been taken. Her Shema had lived on, and it continued to do so. One evening, several years later, Dr. Tal was in his clinic. The telephone rang. He was sitting with a patient, so he ignored the call, but the phone kept on ringing. At that time, his mother was over 90 years old and living in an assisted living facility, and the nurse was calling. This nurse wasn't Jewish, and she shouted in English, Dr. Tal, your mother's blood oxygen is down to 80, and her pulse is down to 30. Tal understood. His mother was in her final moments. And he said, is there anyone there with you? He asked. There was a Sephardic woman there who had come to visit her mother in the same facility. Tal asked the woman to recite the Shema with his mother. And this the woman did. She shouted the Shema with a fervor unlike any Tal ever heard. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Ultimately, her soul passed on. Friends, God always comes through and repays our hope in him. And it may not come exactly when we thought, but it comes. As an elderly Chassid, Rabbi Gerari, once said, God always repays, but he doesn't tell us how long it's going to be. And as Rabbi Akiva taught us, when we never stop crying for that which has sadly been broken, we will surely merit the rejecting of the laughter of that which has been built. It is our job to plead and hope for the redemption and to not stop hoping for it. Every single request, every prayer brings us closer to the time when our deep, unbreakable bond with God will come to the fore, and when his presence will fill the entire earth with the coming of Mashiach. Friends, when there's something we really need in life, something that's on our plate, it may be a challenge, it may be something that seems dark, it may be destruction, it may be trauma, whatever it may be, don't give up. Cry, plead. Our Father in heaven is waiting for you and I, just like the father who waits for his child to beg and plead at times. And just like the parent didn't turn away the child from the bedroom the next night, God will never turn us away. Let us plead, beg, and cry. Let us on this Tisha B'Av this week say, God, Esemach David Avdecha Meher Asatzmiach. Bring us the descendant of King David. We hope and we pray, and we will not give up. May God bless you and I and every one of us around the world and answer our prayers speedily. May he not tarry a moment longer. And may we collectively, the Jewish people and the world over, merit the coming of Mashiach, a time when swords will be turned into plowshares. No more war, no more famine. Only goodness and kindness will fill this world. And as the Rambam says, at that time, Umala ha'aras deyas Hashem kamayim layam mechasim. When Mashiach will come, it's quote from Isaiah, that the world will be filled with the light of God as the waters of the oceans cover the sea. And may this happen speedily in our days. Amen.